David Padwell. David has been is ex FDA and was a lead medical device reviewer, and he's just been a great Catalyst advisor too. And he's just joined, I guess, Prayatha Biomedical Corporation as president and CEO 4 months ago. And David, to talk about regulatory and those aspects, all four tracks for the TPP. Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I think about how much time do we have for this piece,
How much you
Rupa?
need? Like
No, you
half an
you
hour,
tell me.
40?
Just
You tell me. For half an
no,
hour,
it's
40
fine.
minutes?
I'm just trying to grab a an appropriate length of slides here. Just
Let's see,
to
half an hour. Would half an hour be good?
perfect. Um, yeah. So um, here, let me just yeah. Let me just pull this up, and then I'll share some resources with you guys. I've got a longer slide deck, but I'll go ahead and present this. So here, um, get it popped up. So here, so just talk a little bit about regulatory submissions, sort of more broadly. For you guys, a little bit of a do's and don'ts. Some things to think about, and look out for as as you move, as you move into needing to do regulatory, sorts of submissions with FDA. So just a high level overview of sort of how we got to to where we are in terms of FDA review and sort of FDA's perspectives and views of what it is that that they're looking at. I spent a number of years at FDA, and specifically, there's a great set of photos that FDA has on their Flickr site. I think they're still all there, but this one, from my perspective, captures the essence of sort of FDA's view of the world and what they're concerned of, right? And really, what FDA is worried about is that you're going to put an array of hazards in front of the unsuspecting public. Okay, so this is sort of the like beginning, way to think about how FDA sees the world, and it'll help you understand sort of the best ways to approach your interactions with them. And the reason for that is actually goes all the way back to the inception of when FDA was created. FDA, when FDA was formed, there were a number of unscrupulous people peddling snake oil and other things to the unsuspecting public. So it sort of is baked into sort of the culture and sort of the perspective of FDA, some of this sort of original landscape of various products back at the turn of the century, well over 100 years ago now, when FDA was first put together. And you can see here, there are such dangerous things as glucose in sugar. I'm sorry, glucose in candy. So I don't know if you avoid sugar these days as much as maybe you should, but over 100 years ago, I'd say there's sensibilities where this is causing like disease and problems. In addition to, I don't know, arsenic, chrome yellow, other sorts of additives that probably shouldn't be in food and drugs. But anyway, just sort of interesting to see some of that. And then that history sort of moving forward, a number of other kinds of issues you can see here. There are a number of things that FDA took exception to. There was candy containing prizes that kids would choke on, various types of products that would cause all kinds of issues. This particular one I found interesting, that a woman had used Corumlu to remove superfluous hair, but she didn't apply it to her scalp, and that's what had happened to her head. And other interesting things like firecracker balls. The U.S. Cracked down on the use of these. Kids would end up chewing into them, thinking that they were candy. And so, even for things that you wouldn't normally think of as under the purview of sort of the Food and Drug Administration, FDA will get involved in trying to regulate various sorts of hazards, and was involved in getting these particular products removed from the market because of the potential risk to human health. A little bit of a background about what FDA does, right? So FDA is responsible for both protecting the public health and advancing the public health. And and within the context of my area of primary experience and responsibility, we're looking really at medical devices. I've got some other details as well that I can provide around sort of biologics and drugs. If you're working along those kinds of pathways, I can provide you some additional insights and into that kind of a pathway. But when we think about what is a medical device, for those of you working in that specific area, really it's defined in some ways as not a drug. Okay, there's some more like specific definitions here, but it's just sort of interesting where basically when you think about the regulatory history, FDA started regulating foods and drugs, and then out of that came in the late 70s and early 80s, the device regulations and a sort of codification of the regulations into the Code of Federal Regulations. And then an area that many of you may be focused on is specifically thinking about digital health. Okay, there's a broad scope of digital health technology, digital health products. FDA has a number of guidances that they've released in this area, and there are some links that you can find here on this slide. And specifically, within this sort of broader area, there are also a number of mobile medical apps. Want to sort of highlight that for you. FDA has a number of policies specifically related to mobile medical apps and how to think about the use of these. And a number of these products are under what's called enforcement discretion, which means that FDA is technically able to regulate these products, but they have decided to look the other way, and they've decided at this time not to enforce the regulations on a subset of products that they could more stringently regulate. And so that covers sort of a broad array of digital health products. There are a number of digital health products which are not medical devices, not medical products. There are a number that are medical products but fall under this enforcement discretion type of category. And then there are a number of other products that are specifically subject to FDA's focus in terms of regulation. And as we get into the advancement and more use of AI and other sorts of software technologies across devices, drugs, and biologics, a lot of this is going to come more and more into play for the various projects that you end up working on. I just want to highlight briefly for you as well, FDA is not the only regulatory agency you necessarily want to think about interacting with. There's some stuff here as well for the ASTP, which is around specifically certification of health IT. So depending on the types of projects that you end up working on, or sort of how they intersect with electronic health records and other sort of systems, this might be important for, for the specific projects that you're working on. And really, I want to give you today a couple, basic principles, in terms of how to proceed when you're thinking about regulatory, issues, when you're thinking about regulatory strategy, when you're thinking about, how to incorporate, all of this into the projects that you're working on. First and foremost, you really need a regulatory strategy. So whether we're talking about devices, whether we're talking about drugs or biologics, whatever it is that you're working on, you really need to have a regulatory strategy. And this is really, a living document that will change over time. And you need to, think about what are the risks, what are the pathways to market, what are other products that are already out there that look like this product that I'm working on? And so that's sort of the foundation, right out of the gate for, for anything that you're working on that's going to be regulated by FDA, is really putting together a regulatory strategy assessment. And keep in mind, everything is good until it isn't. Okay, so as you move forward, you won't probably get to this point, here and in the summer, but oftentimes, you'll get to a point where you figure out that reality and expectation, for how all of this is going to go, end up in very different places. So as you're thinking about regulatory strategy and regulatory assessments, you want to kind of plan for that, prepare for some engagements, specifically, with FDA, specifically, when it comes to clinical studies, when it comes to, preparation for them. But also just, it's important to start with a recognition, both in terms of the regulatory assessment, but also the path forward, in recognizing what it is that you have available to you. What data can you leverage? Oftentimes companies that come to me have a lot more data already that they can use that they don't necessarily realize that they can leverage. They're concerned that it hasn't been collected, following good laboratory practices. Maybe there's something that can be done, about that. But regardless. So first, start with what is it that you have? What do you know? What can you leverage? And then if you need to go and, talk with FDA, if you need to go and, conduct a clinical study, then, okay, what are the questions that you're trying to answer? With that study, what are the questions you're trying to answer with that interaction with FDA? And when you get into running a clinical study, in those cases where one is needed, you really need to make sure that you're managing any third parties who are running a study, for you. Make sure that you have adequate oversight of the study, however it is that it's being run, because oftentimes, this is something that if you're paying attention along the way, you can clean up certain issues as they happen. But oftentimes, if you let things go too long, and then you get to the end of a study, there's certain stuff that is just unrecoverable if you happen to have a third-party CRO who wasn't really on top of things, or if you were missing, some key compliance issues along this, the way, certain things become more and more difficult to resolve or correct with an investigator, or whoever. And just recognize, in terms of clinical, data, in terms of clinical studies, there are possibilities of leveraging, existing data, even when things, don't go to plan. And, I've been involved in a number of different projects that, absolutely, at least, before I got involved and even afterwards, there's all kinds of things, can go wrong. But it's important from a regulatory standpoint to just, recognize, okay, what's the situation? What do we have? What can we leverage? What's the path forward? Sort of everybody take a breath. That's from my perspective, the right way to approach, any kind of, sort of regulatory questions or concerns or panic that people might have, and definitely lay out, timelines. So when you're thinking about regulatory assessments in particular, think about your best and worst cases. A lot of companies or a lot of projects will sort of focus on, okay, here's the absolute best case, here's how quickly we can do it, and they haven't considered the various things that can slow something down, the various worst case situations. And for a lot of small startups, you need to make sure that you have adequate runway for some of the worst case scenarios. Otherwise, I've seen a number of companies not fail because the product wasn't working, but simply because they ran out of runway to be able to collect all of the data that they needed to put in front of FDA and get the product onto the market. And then, in terms of interactions with FDA, definitely you want to be building a relationship, and you want to think about when to introduce your product. If you don't have to interact with FDA, if your product is not regulated, then you shouldn't interact with FDA like at all. But if your product is regulated by FDA, if you do at some point need to go into them, earlier is better. It's better to start building that relationship and that rapport early on. And here's a little bit of an idea when you're thinking about pre-submissions, to FDA. A little bit, of a perspective, in terms of when to go, to FDA, what kind of scenarios in which it's useful, to take, some information and go to FDA and ask them some questions or do an informational meeting, with them. And I'll go ahead and highlight, specifically this informational meeting, setting. You can go to FDA even without questions. They're a little bit more resource constrained today. I don't know if you're, paying attention to the news, but there are some, continued rifts and that's called it's a reduction in force sort of happening right now within FDA, which is affecting some of these timelines. But nonetheless, what I've found is that the review teams are still, responsive. They're largely unaffected directly. There's a lot of support staff and, sort of support functions that are happening, outside of primary review work by FDA that are affected. Things that I've seen my clients affected by are, for instance, small business designation, requests. So I had one company that wasn't able to get a small business designation back from FDA in any kind of a timely manner, and they just ended up going ahead with a normal submission because we still, even after the submission has gone in, we still don't have feedback from FDA on the status of their small business designation. So there are a number of these kinds of issues, or if you end up having to interact with the Office of Combination Products because there's some question about jurisdiction for your specific product, that is also an area that seems some delays due to sort of what's been happening with the staffing side of things. So it's a lot of support things that happen around submissions that are mostly affected these days. But I say that just to highlight for you that at the moment FDA might even push back on holding an informational meeting, but they seem to still be taking them. And in general, it's sort of normal operations at FDA, depending on the group. But what's helpful with an informational meeting is that it gives you a chance just to sort of present what it is that you're working on, where it is you're going, and give FDA an early look at at some of the path that you have ahead of you. They'll give you helpful feedback and sort of general comments about where you're at and what they would like to see you doing. But you don't necessarily have to bring questions to them. A normal pre-submission interaction, you'll come with a specific set of topics and questions for them. And you'll specifically ask FDA to review certain documents. For an informational meeting, you just sort of generally present about what it is that you're doing, about the device, familiarize them with that. And the benefit there is really to start building that relationship with FDA early and earlier than you otherwise might. And just want to highlight a couple mistakes that happen when it comes to FDA engagement. And really the first mistake I want to highlight is not considering the timing of your request. So you want to make sure that um, as you're planning out what studies you're going to be performing, when you're going to engage with FDA, you want to make sure that you're coming to them when it's possible, for them to review a protocol before you've done it, for instance. And specifically when you're thinking about more costly studies, oftentimes this is for animal studies. A lot of bench testing, is probably less significant in terms of costs, but definitely when you're thinking about biocompatibility testing or animal testing in particular, these are some times when it makes sense to go to FDA, put something in front of them. When you're starting a clinical study, absolutely, this is when you want to think about engaging FDA and getting some feedback prior to really undertaking a very significantly time and cost intensive endeavor. The second big failure to highlight is really failing to get clarity from FDA. So generally, what happens in terms of a pre-submission interaction and engagement is that you get written feedback from FDA. You then have a meeting. If it's a meeting, pre-submission, I generally recommend that you actually ask for a meeting. You don't just ask for written feedback, because then FDA will give you written feedback. And then you have an opportunity in an actual meeting with FDA to get clarity on their feedback. And that's really what you want to do in the context of an FDA meeting, or even if you get written feedback and there's any sort of a question, you want to follow up with FDA and see if you can get some clarity around any areas where there might be a lack of clarity. Because I've seen companies, both from my time at FDA and then since leaving and helping companies navigate interactions with FDA, I've seen companies across the board end up doing all sorts of costly, time intensive work that was not FDA's expectation, and there was just some sort of a misunderstanding in terms of what FDA wanted to see for something. And so you really want to make sure that you get that you get clarity from FDA on anything that might not be fully clear. And some additional practical considerations, just thinking about classification for products. I want to highlight sort of in the U.S. system. So the European sort of approach is a little bit different. In the rest of the world, there are some different paradigms, but in the U.S. in particular, classification is class 1, class 2, and class 3, and that goes from low to medium to high risk. And generally, for class 1 products, there are general controls, but there aren't specific submissions. That varies on a case-by-case basis. Generally, for class 2, there are general and sometimes special controls. Usually a 510K is required for class 2 devices, though there are a number of class 2 products that are 510K exempt. And then for class 3 products, this is where you get into PMA territory. And these are generally, life supporting, or life sustaining, implantable, kinds of, products. And you can see some examples of these different, classification levels and some considerations there. And just to highlight as well, de novos are a way to, get a product into that class 2 medium risk, sort of category, without having to go through, through a PMA. And there are also some other sort of less used, pathways, humanitarian device
David,
exemption.
I'll just
Yes.
stop you here because
Yeah.
the question asked is what is 510K, what is PMA? So if you could just
Yeah.
explain that.
Yeah. So a 510K is, well, here. Um, so A 510K is what's used to get to get a substantial equivalent determination from FDA that a product which is a medium risk already classified device type is just like something else that's on the market. So it's specifically for medical devices, and for and for PMAs, that's what's called it's a pre-market approval. Okay, and that is a more involved process, which includes manufacturing information and usually more detailed testing and uh, uh, testing support and additional clinical data typically. Though clinical data could be required for 510Ks and de novos and that sort of class 2 category, but is almost always going to be required in that class 3 category. Device exemptions. There are a number of products, as I mentioned, that are going to be exempt from specific FDA regulatory controls. They're not going to need a 510K. They're not going to need a PMA. And you can see the vast majority of class 1 devices fall into that category, and a significant number of class 2 devices as well. I think it might actually be a larger percentage now, since when some of this data was collected, because FDA continues to exempt categories of devices as we move forward. And specifically when you think about FDA regulatory controls, FDA can put together what are called special controls, and this it's going to vary by specific device type, but FDA will identify that for this specific device, maybe clinical data is required or in vivo testing is required, that certain types of information is required in the labeling, things along these lines. You can see some examples of general controls and also some examples of special controls here on this slide. And then here just want to highlight some details for Q-sub and pre-sub requests, some information here about this type of submission to FDA. As well for IDEs. Here's a little bit of information. This is what's required to initiate a clinical study, depending on the level of risk. So if it's a non-significant risk study, you can do this just with interaction with an IRB, and there's a process to go through with an IRB. So if you have any questions about this or sort of clinical study requirements, let me know. I'll also highlight a 513 G. Fundamentally, I would advise never to do a 513G. You should be aware it is a type of submission, and FDA will oftentimes recommend that you do it. But the timelines can vary quite significantly. They can be significantly extended beyond 60 days. I know one friend of mine had over a year long wait to get feedback from FDA for a 513G, and I think at that point they ended up appealing the determination and getting it changed. So, the problem with a 513G is FDA is supposedly going to tell you how your device is classified, but I've run into all kinds of headaches here around what actually happens practically. So I would personally, except in very narrow, sort of instances, I would recommend never doing a 513G. Like, this is my advice to you. If before you do one, call me and let's talk, and I'll talk you off the ledge. Like, you shouldn't do it. Maybe you'll have a good reason to do it, but I would recommend not. And
And
then,
there's a couple of other questions. I'll just
yeah,
take one of those questions and ask you to take the other.
sure.
Bree writes, when in the catalyst process should someone seek FDA approval? Bree, at the catalyst time, you don't really seek FDA approval. There's a long pathway to go through. And maybe, David, you can talk about the
Yeah.
pathway that this is still early stage. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this is where, most of where, we'll be, is really going to be in this sort of IDE, kind of, stage, maybe clinical studies, maybe you're in that Q submission, stage. I work with people, who are doing a request for designation, for instance, for early stage products. You're trying to figure out which product review group at FDA is going to have responsibility for a submission. They say they take 60 days. They sort of game that system, in terms of how long it takes. But really, you're probably not doing. You should be prepared for moving towards a regulatory submission where you're getting approval. Be aware of those regulatory pathways and timelines. You're generally going to need to be aware of that to be able to get the funding that you need to get things moving. But for Catalyst, you're generally going to be at the stage of collecting preclinical or clinical, kinds of data on a particular product, and really establishing whether that product can achieve some specific intended use in a clinical setting, or in some kind of other kind of bench performance kind of an environment.
Yeah, so just to answer also, it is still very early, and and do people pursue FDA and regulatory approval before or after the TPP winning funding? It has way later than that because,
It's
as
much
David
later.
said, you have to have, like, you may even have to have a clinical trial, or you have to show equivalence, and you have to have enough of validation. So it is not at this stage. In fact, companies would raise funding, and they might, with sufficient funding, go to the FDA in case of a medical device. But even for a pharmaceutical, for you may have to go through extensive clinical trials, phase 2, phase 3, and even the smaller company may be acquired, has to be very likely acquired by big pharma, which conducts those clinical trials. So this is just very early stage, and it is more for you all to understand the processes and think about what would be the regulatory pathway. So, David, continue.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, and then there's just in these slides that I'll share, there's some more information here on who you can call, where you can search, where you can find guidance. This guidance, by the way, is cross-cutting across FDA review centers. This is a very helpful resource. There are a number of email updates. You should be aware as well that, just sort of in general, FDA does regular updates to guidances. They have what's called an A list, a B list, an under construction list, and a list of final guidances that were issued sort of 10, 20, 30 years prior that they're planning on looking at. And there's some information specifically for devices, around what FDA calls the Breakthrough Devices Program, a Safer Technologies Program. You might be at the stage of sort of like being aware that your technology might fit into one of these kinds of categories. Specifically, if you're talking about a device, there are some similar kinds of programs as well on the drug side of things. And then I want to share with you as well, there are some resources just in terms of average time to decision. Again, this is more for sort of like planning purposes and thinking about, sort of future submissions. There's this great resource called FDAdays.com. So, if you want to think about the far distant future and an actual 510(k) submission for your product, if in fact it falls into that kind of a category, you can look at how long it takes FDA to do their review and how long it has taken over time within the particular reviewing group at FDA. This is pulling from FDA's APIs. There are different systems when you're looking at CDER and CBER, but specifically for CDRH, this data is accessible. I generally, if you're looking at this, you don't want to look at the receipt cohort. You want to look at the decision cohort. That's going to be your best more accurate kind of predictions. It's not that FDA at the in the most recent year got much more efficient. It's just that the only submissions they've reviewed are the ones that didn't take them very long in 2025, whereas here you see a little bit more of an accurate picture. And same kind of information is available for de novos. if you want to know information about about PMAs or about some of the drugs, you really want to go and look at FDA's reports. Specifically, Medufa would the Medufa reports would give you information about PMAs, and some information about pre-subs, and that here as well. If you have specific questions about other sorts of product areas, specifically for drugs and biologics, I can send you some other resources as well. So, but that's really, what I have to share, today. I don't know if there's some further questions, that I can answer for you all.
Yeah, there are a few more questions. And David, one is why is the timeline slow? Malika Dale asks, why is the timeline so fluid with 513G and not the others?
Yeah, so it's I would say FDA just doesn't follow their timeline as strictly for those, and why is that? Because there are all kinds of complications for those submissions. So for 513Gs and pre-RFDs, FDA is not making a determination to approve a product. They're trying to make a determination about what a product is. And then they'll come back and ask for more information. It'll be a whole back and forth mess. And then they'll oftentimes make a determination lacking certain key information, and that oftentimes takes time, and the lawyers are involved. It's a whole disaster. Whereas the normal reviews don't involve lawyers directly unless something goes wrong, and so those timelines are just a little bit more more streamlined because there's a process. There are lots of these that get done, and FDA is held to more strict standards by Congress around around getting those through.
Okay, then there are a few more questions, and after these questions, Nate, just in the interest of time, you present, and my slides can just be shared with the groups. Could you please, Himani is asking, could you please clarify how the FDA typically classifies software-based tools that support clinical decision making?
Yeah, so there FDA has a guidance on this, and it depends. So I'm going to give you the sort of the regulatory answer around that. So you really have to take a look at that clinical decision support guidance document. FDA outlines those areas where they're going to expect you to do some kind of a regulatory submission, where it is that you're going to sort of fall outside of the purview of what they're concerned about. Usually this is going to break down. I mean, I'm going to oversimplify it, but basically, if a physician can make an independent judgment, that means they have time to do it and the information is available for them to review independently. Usually you can avoid that being a regulated, kind of a product, or at least not as heavily regulated a product. But if you're making a decision that a physician cannot independently review, then that becomes more problematic. So if you're just making a statement that a physician gets and they can't look at the underlying data to come to their own assessment of whether they agree or disagree with what the algorithm has decided, then that's when you fall under more heavy regulatory scrutiny.
Okay, then there are three more questions. We'll take them and then move to Nate. Uh, One is Xuan Yuan. I'm interested in learning how the predicate is usually chosen for 510(k) application. Does FDA suggest predicate or the applicant can choose predicate to compare? Thank you.
Yeah, so generally the applicant is gonna pick a predicate. FDA may give you feedback on, sort of that selection and, recommend a different predicate. So it's a little bit of both, but you will make the first sort of determination as a company. And that selection is really going to be based on usually what's closest, what has the most sort of favorable kind of indications for use statement, because in the current environment for 510Ks, that doesn't usually change very much. FDA used to give companies more leeway in terms of the specific statement for the indications for use. But anymore, you really need to stay pretty narrowly, focused and aligned with the predicate device there to be able to make it through that pathway.
And then Shrey Singh asks, today Whoop, the wearable, got issued with a warning letter to stop marketing blood pressure control as it resembles a medical device. Whoop is large, has a substantial user base. How would they respond appropriately to this?
Well, I don't know exactly what interactions they're having, with FDA. Um, it is sort of an interesting area about when some of these measurements fall under sort of general wellness and when they don't. Um, it'll be interesting to see how some of that plays out. I don't know exactly what they're going to do or what interactions they've already had that might shape sort of how they decide to respond.
And the
I
last
know that
question we'll
we have a
take
question from we have a question from
Anya.
Anya
Yeah,
too,
we'll
I
take the
believe. But yeah,
question from Anya.
Thanks. It's a quick question. Is there sort of like a no capes kind of situation for software as medical device, like a um, no reference to billing codes allowed? You talked a little bit answering Hamani's question, but I'm just wondering if a device is directly suggesting a certain procedure or a certain like assessment, is that just explicitly software as medical device?
yeah. So if what you're doing, so there are all kinds of scenarios where, like if you're recommending that additional procedures be done, and the physician can independently kind of verify the information that you're relying on for that, then again, that's sort of clinical decision support software that would be less heavily regulated. If you're taking a bunch of information into a black box and then making a determination that somebody should go get an MRI, that is more challenging. If, on the other hand, so there are some interesting workarounds potentially here where if a insurance company, for instance, took all the information they had available to them and then made a determination that they would cover an MRI. So if they sent a letter saying, if you decide to go get an MRI, it's covered. It's kind of an end run around it, and you can probably get away without it being clinical decision support software. Even though you might be basing that determination about their willingness to pay based on sort of a clinical decision kind of framework. So there are some interesting areas here just because of like if you're putting it in front of a clinician, that's one thing. If you basically tell somebody or a clinician that, look, insurance has pre-approved these procedures for coverage, it's sort of in more of a gray area where you could probably sort of avoid that, even though they might take all of that information, put it into a black box. You have no idea why, and it just says, oh yeah, we've pre-approved these procedures without needing any further review, to sort of incentivize people to go get additional testing who maybe would benefit from that. So and then specifically around billing, so billing, coding, this kind of support, that all falls outside of sort of the medical, device sort of, purview. So it depends on what you're doing. If it's just that we're assuming that you would have, sort of build for these procedures, or these are the ones that you're going to do next, and you're kind of helping the workflow, that's a different thing. But if you're recommending that they go and do additional tests, then again, depending on how you do it, you fall into more or less regulated territory.
And I thank you, David, for the interest of thanks a lot, David. That was great.
Thank you.
And Nate leads the digital health track Catalyst, helps manage the Catalyst internship, director of Launchpad, and also plays an important role with NSF ICOR. So, Nate, take it from here.
Great. Thanks a bunch, Rupa. And, continued thanks to David for your sharing all your insight, wisdom, expertise with regulatory. I mean, it's incredibly enlightening to learn, and I learn things every single time I hear from you. All right. So, this is normally the last presentation of the TPP workshop series, but fortunately, you all have still one more presentation night next Tuesday. But around this time, people start asking what is next on this journey. And well, the preeminent next step are your TP presentations. And so just a mild bit of housekeeping, you should be hearing from your Catalyst facilitator about these in the next week or so. We're in the process of doing the final scheduling. So you haven't missed anything yet, but come mid-August, late August, you'll be doing those presentations, and we're very much looking forward to all of your hard work. So a lot of people start asking, once this internship finally finishes, after all your hard work over the summer, you've done your presentation to the Catalyst advisors and other great stakeholders. What are some other opportunities that are available to me within UCSF? So we have this incredibly vibrant ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship, as you can see by this picture here. And it may seem like a jungle out there with I&E, but that's really what we're here for, to help cultivate you, your innovations, as well as you as an innovator. So by way of being part of this internship, we will sign you up for the Innovation Ventures newsletter. This includes lots of different events, panels, workshops, all sorts of opportunities for you to continue to learn more about innovation and how to be an innovator, how to nurture your innovations along the translational pathway. One of these specific examples is the UCSF Innovator Enrichment. There's a set of innovator seminars, there's innovator consultations, and a lot more on this to come. So feel free to stay tuned. And another very upcoming next step is the Global Life Sciences for Healthcare and the Entrepreneurship course. It's a virtual masterclass straight out of Silicon Valley. It's run by Stephanie Maris. It's a phenomenal course. It's all virtual, takes place over 10 weeks, and enrollment for fall is open now. And there's a really cool innovator and entrepreneurship community that Stephanie has cultivated. So we encourage you to check that out. Stephanie is also doing a really cool startup 101 class. She's bringing that back for UCSF innovators. Unfortunately, there was incredible demand and all of the slots have been filled, but that's something to look forward to for next year. And what I want to spend the bulk of the time on for the time that we have remaining is on UCSF NSF I-Core. This is an endeavor based out of the National Science Foundation. It is an experiential training program that prepares physicians, scientists, trainees, learners like yourselves to really help you move your projects toward commercialization. We talk about bench to bedside, the translational valley of death all the time. And the NSFI core is that really next key experience. We encourage all of our Catalyst awardees strongly to take this course. Many of them have. Many of them have gone on to nationals, have gotten additional funding, and we'll talk about some of the success metrics there. But people who have completed I-Core, both the regional and the national course, are 3 times more likely to get an SBIR or STTR grant. So incredibly valuable for all the people in Catalyst. And over the past summer, you've been working, most of the interns here are coming from different labs or different programs and are working on other people's innovations. So this I-Core is a great opportunity for you to cultivate your own innovations. And this is based on the idea of both Steve Blank's customer discovery as well as Alex's Osterwalder's business model canvas. So it's kind of come together and merged to form the Lean Launchpad curriculum. And this is the basis of NSF iCore. So I'm going to be quickly moving through these slides just in the interest of time. But this is not, a brand new concept, but this is tried and true. So this is the business model canvas here that you're seeing. And this business model canvas comes after, many years and many, many different books of writing a business plan. You may hear that term all the time. What is your business plan? And what books are you reading? And these are some, very, very popular business books over the days. But this has really been molded and evolved into this business model canvas that you're seeing on the right and that you'll work with through iCore. And the crux of this idea is that, customers don't really care so much about your technology. They much more care about their problems, their needs, and they want a solution. They don't necessarily care about your tech or how your tech works. They are looking for an answer to that problem that they have. And, this is summarized in a very famous Steve Jobs quote here. And again, iCore, it's really focused on the customer discovery process. Over in the regional course, you do 20 customer discovery interviews. For the national course, you will do 100. And you'll also work on the business model canvas. So numbers 2 and 3 for the regional, as you can see in this slide here. So customer segments and value propositions. But again, the focus is knowing your customer. Oftentimes people come in with an innovation that they think is, the best thing since sliced bread. And, it may, but until that is tested for you to know that your customers do indeed want sliced bread, then you don't really know. We don't want to be a hammer looking for a nail. We want to fill a need and a gap that your potential customers have. And that is one of the most tried and true methods to form a sustainable business. And so you are in luck. UCSF is part of the Northwest I-Core region, along with several other preeminent universities on the West Coast, University of Washington, UC Davis, Oregon State, University of California, Santa Cruz, UC Berkeley, UC, did I say Irvine? Not sure, but all of these different classes, all of these different universities have come together to form the Northwest Hub. And UCSF is holding one of our regional courses on October 6th, 9th, and 20th. It's not that much of a commitment. It's 3 days. Each session is 3 hours. All the sessions are held via Zoom. And then you do the customer discovery at your own time. So this QR code sends you to the application. The link that you'll get these slides to will also send you to the application. And this is a phenomenal way to test your innovation, your idea. Doesn't have to be super far along. It can be far along if it is. Really test your idea, your hypothesis for a business against the market by doing this experiential learning of customer discovery. This is what the application looks like. You want to make sure it's the UC San Francisco virtual class that you can see there. However, there are other classes, again, from our partner institutions. As you can see here, these are the different regions across. And we're this purple group in here along the West Coast. You could participate in any of those courses. If this October 6th, 9th, and the 20th don't work for you. But again, we highly encourage this to all the Catalyst sororities. If you haven't taken it already, you absolutely want to do that. And for anybody else who's still cultivating their innovation or their hypothesis for a company. And as I touched on in the very beginning,
Nate, there's one question.
Yes.
Shruti Nagaraja wanted to know, can I apply if I don't have an idea myself but want to be part of a team?
This isn't quite the mode for that. If you're interested in possibly observing, we can consider opening that up for you. But these are usually for people who are, invested enough in this idea of theirs to perform the customer discovery. There's plenty of opportunities that we do and that you'll see in some of these other events and workshops, opportunities, mixers, if you will, to meet different teams and partner with different teams and join one of their teams. If you're working with a Catalyst team and you want to continue working with them, this could be a great opportunity to do that. Like, hey, so and so, professor, PI, are you doing I-Corps? Can I be a part of your I-Corps team? Those are potential questions that you can ask to help them perform this customer discovery. Though, again, this is more focused for ideas that are already there and hypotheses that you want to test to the market as opposed to just joining a team. There are other opportunities and mixers to join a team and learn more there. I see we're
And one more thing. There
yes.
is one more question. Brenda is asking to participate, and some of it you've already answered. To participate in ICO as students, do we need to have our ideas or can we contribute to a PI's innovation? Additionally, are concepts related to non-biotech fields taken into account for ICOR?
Yes, so for the first question, again, similar like I touched on, if you're a part of this team with the UCSF PI who is doing I-Corps, you're encouraged to do it that way. But again, we're recruiting teams with an idea that they would like to test as opposed to individuals who just want to experience it. Because again, it's experiential learning. And that's really what makes it so powerful, as opposed to being a more passive observer. But you're encouraged to continue to network and join a team and encourage the team to join I-Corps. And the second part of the question, Rupa, I'm going to pull it up in chat as well.
Yeah, I can read it again.
For
A
non-medical things. Yes. So UCSF, we focus on
non-biotech
healthcare
fields.
product development stuff. But UC Berkeley, University of Washington, UC Irvine, they do all different sectors. Ag tech, they do specific ones. Blue tech, which is ocean climate type work. And it's interesting to be a part of groups that are focused on one specific area, like health tech or healthcare products, for example, because those are the people in your cohort. But if that timing doesn't work for you, there are cohorts that are industry agnostic, and you can learn from your cohort there and all the different kinds of things and have an idea that is non-health tech for another session run from one of our partners.
Thank you, Nate.
Great. All right. Well, we are already past time, but as you can see here, people who have done I-Corps, done the regional, done the national. Rupa has been an industry mentor on the national, so she really knows a considerable amount about how much great work people are putting into this. And as a result of going through this process of the customer discovery, so many startups are incredibly more successful. You can see these metrics here. And it's, again, a really great way to test your idea to the market in a very low stakes, early way. So when you're designing your company, you're designing your product, you're doing it with that customer in mind. So I appreciate everyone's time. Here's my contact information if you have any questions about I-Corps specifically or generally the UCSF innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. So again, thanks all for your time.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Nate, for presenting. And also, the slides I put together on project management will also be shared with you all. And as Nate already said, this is the last part of the sprint. So get your TPPs ready. We'll be sharing TPP templates, presentation templates, work with the teams putting together the pitches, and those will be presented to the industry advisors in August. And again, thanks a lot, David, for your time. Thanks, Nate, for speaking about next steps.
Thanks,
And you've
David.
got
Thanks, Rupa. We missed
you should be able to share.
your project management, so we're excited to see the slides.
That's fine. Just the slides are explanatory. So yeah.
Great. All right. Thanks all. Special
Sorry to
thanks
take
to
so
David
much time, I
Pudwell.
guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.